Hey guys, it's Will. It's Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. Welcome back to the channel. If you are new to the channel, welcome and thank you for finding us. We are here today to talk about Black Mask Hell to the Yes, the classic 1996 Jet Li sci-fi martial arts action thriller blood-soaked grotesque extravaganza. I'm being a little bit over the top in talking about it, but you know what it is if you know what it is. And I would imagine that most people know what it is because this is a very famous film. This is the Eureka Entertainment release, which was released in April of 2024, and this is region A and region B. So I have the region A copy in my hand. I don't know if you can see that, but there's the little A right there. This is a 2-disc release. This is probably as definitive a release of this film as we're going to get on Blu-ray right now, I would argue. I mean, it feels very, very definitive to me. It's got 4 versions of the movie on here. It's got the Hong Kong, uncut original Hong Kong version. There's the export version. Those have multiple language options. The Hong Kong original cut version, excuse me, has the 2 mixes of Cantonese. And then, is there a dub? I believe there's also, oh no, that's Frank's commentary is the English language track on that one. I was remembering that there's an English language track on that file, but it's actually Frank's commentary. So there's 2 Cantonese mixes on the Hong Kong theatrical version. And then on the export cut, you have dubs. And then there's the Taiwanese version of the film, which can be watched in Mandarin audio, which is about 2 minutes longer than the Hong Kong version. And then there's the full extended version where they take all of the unique footage from all of the versions and put it together into one epic master version, which is like an hour, I think an hour 47 minutes. So hour 39 minutes, I think is how long the Hong Kong uncut version is. So it's about 8 minutes longer than that. The export version is an hour and 27 minutes, so it's like 20 minutes longer than that version, if that's the version you're used to. So it's 2 discs, as you can see here, 4 versions of the film. There's an archival making of, which maybe you've seen if you had this movie on DVD or something like that, but there's like, you know, interviews with Choi Hark, who's the producer on this film, and a lot of other people who were involved. So you get lots of behind the scenes perspective on that. There's multiple commentary tracks. There's multiple like kind of talking head little interviews on here. There's a booklet in here with 2 different essays in it. So you kind of get the whole shebang. All the bells and whistles. Eureka pulled out all the stops, and I think this is a really fantastic release of this seminal film. This review probably won't be too long because I don't think too much needs to be said about the movie. I will talk about my impressions of it. I think the last time I saw this movie was in 2006. I'm having trouble remembering exactly when I saw it, but I can kind of like I think I watched it in high school too. So the story is that after the success of Lethal Weapon 4, which was Jet Li's first Hollywood movie, which I think was 98, Black Mask, which had been released in Hong Kong, you know, like I said, in 96, was then rushed into like a US version and put out, I think, on VHS and DVD, like circa 99. So I would have been 16 years old at the time, and I was really into Jackie Chan at the time, and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon came out not long after that. The Matrix came out around that time, so I was watching a lot of these types of movies. So I think I saw this movie in high school. I definitely saw it around 2006 or so. This is my first rewatch in about 18 years. I really didn't remember that much about it, but this is, I mean, it's just like a classic movie of that era. It is so much of that era. It's such a 90s movie, and it is so dated, and it's like, and I'm not saying that in a negative way, like it just feels so 90s, like the tone of it, the subject matter, the lighting. It's got a lot of like off-kilter camera angles, right? So like for no reason, the camera's just tilted to the side. There's like really fast editing and really kind of disorienting, like quick camera movements, cutting into all this stuff. And it has this very dark kind of like 90s tone when you think of like Silence of the Lambs, 7, and these like psychopaths who are doing this crazy stuff. And it's like really violent, gruesome, and like people are murdered with like acid in this movie and like nasty chemicals. The faces are melted. Like there's a lot of blood in this movie. Jet Li is like at one point throwing what look like CDs at people that I guess have blades on them because they're like sticking in people's necks and there's like blood spraying out. Like it's a very over the top movie. Anthony Wong has a cameo in this movie that is totally ridiculous and over the top. And honestly kind of reminded me, the whole Anthony Wong sequence, it's only like really one scene or sequence in the film, kind of reminded me of The Crow. Like, I think there's some tonal influence from The Crow, and then maybe also from the Tim Burton Batman movies on this film. But The Crow, especially with like the darkness, the violence, the kind of gruesome and grotesque nature of it, like the fact that drugs are involved and stuff like that. To give you a basic overview of the plot of this film, there is a group of like essentially super soldiers who have their nerves removed via surgery, so they can't feel anything. So like these perfect, you know, killing machines or whatever. And Jet Li is like their leader. And then someone goes to exterminate them all, and they kind of scatter because they're worried they've become too powerful. And Jet Li is living as a librarian in Hong Kong. So Jet Li is in this movie, I should say. Karen Mok is in this movie. Francois Yip is in this movie. Lam Ching Wan is in this movie. I always think Lau Ching Wan, excuse me. Sean Lau is like the English name, so that's like the name that's always in my head, but his name is Lau Ching Wan. You know, who's an incredible actor, who's in a lot of, like he's in Full Alert, and he's in, what's the Johnny Toe? He's in that Johnny Toe movie, Loving You, is that what that movie's called? And he's in the Running Out of Time movies, and just like, you know, he's a phenomenal actor, and he's great in this movie. And I think Jet Li is a very good actor, honestly, and I think he's underrated as an actor, and I think he brings, his presence is almost like Buddha-like. And in a way, this is like the quintessential Jet Li character, because he has this very kind of Zen thing about like, you know, violence isn't always the answer. And like, he likes working in this library where he's undercover and hanging out with these regular people and, you know, like just kind of letting go of everything and existing. And yet at the same time, he's this like absolute ridiculous killing machine. And if he has to kick into high gear, he will. And he does. And mayhem ensues. So he's working at this library, and Lau Ching-wan plays a cop who the Jet Li character has befriended, and they play like chess together every day. And then some of the old, you know, some of his old proteges from this group that he used to lead show up in Hong Kong. And drug dealers start dying, and this plot starts to unfold, and the cop is involved, and Jet Li kind of gets pulled back into the life of being this character, the Black Mask, who he was when he was originally trained for this assassin thing. And like in classic, like ridiculous, you know, kind of genre, 80s, 90s sci-fi, it's never explained. These people are basically like superhuman, right? And all that we're told is their nerves are removed so they don't feel pain. And it's like, not feeling pain doesn't mean you can get shot with a machine gun and be totally fine. It just means you don't feel it, right? There's like things about the setup where you're like, that doesn't totally make sense, but in like a really fun way. Like, this is a very fun movie, and I don't, even though it's a movie that's kind of dark and there are some gruesome details in it, which again I think is very 90s, and it's very like post category 3 as well, right? Like category 3 films in like the late 80s, early 90s. I think early 90s is really when you got a lot of those. And Anthony Wong playing this totally insane character in this gruesome sequence kind of seems like an homage to like category 3, or like a way to bring kind of category 3 into the mainstream and stuff like that. And so it takes from a lot of these kind of dark, disturbing things, and it kind of funnels it into like a more mainstream action sci-fi type of movie that, again, is like a little bit preposterous and silly. There's a scene where people, the bad guys, who have machine guns, and they're rollerblading around shooting people with machine guns, and I'm like, oh my God, this is too 90s. I can't even take it. The export version with the English dub actually has a totally different score too. And it's like a very like 90s hip hoppy sounding score. I actually really liked the score on the Hong Kong cut. I thought it was really cool. I really like the scenes in this movie where Jet Li is being like a normal dude. It's this really interesting thing where it's like almost like this quirky kind of 90s indie aesthetic where there's like voiceover, and they're like in a library, and it's like this silly group of kind of quirky characters. Karen Mok is like always in and out of love. Like she's getting broken up with the guy when we first meet her, and she's always just like looking for someone. And, you know, obviously Jet Li is like right there, but she's like, oh, I can't consider him seriously. And also, as to how very dated it is, there is a scene where he's talking to Lau Ching-wan, and they're like, oh, he's gay. And she's like, no, he can't be gay. It's like, this is stuff that you would never see that now. Or if you did see it, it would be handled very, very, very differently. But I think one of the characters says, oh, it turns out he is horny. He just likes men. It's kind of amazing. It's kind of amazing. But then, I mean, the fight scenes, right? That there's Yuen Woo-ping did the choreography here, and the fight scenes are just like, and there's a lot of shooting in this movie too. Actually, it's worth noting. This is kind of, in a way, this is kind of a movie that arrives at like the apex of all these cultural trends smashing together, of like sci-fi becoming really big in the 80s and then get that carrying into the 90s, really as a result of Star Wars, right? Because if you read about like the history, I was reading a couple of years ago about the history of anime and how like OVA, which is or original video animation, which was like straight to VHS anime, became such a big thing because post Star Wars and then, you know, Alien and all these other movies started coming out. There was this huge appetite for science fiction among the fan base, the public, whatever you want to call it. And if you could make these movies quickly and for not a ton of money and get them straight onto video and directly into the hands of the audience, they would like just devour them, and they just wanted so much of this genre stuff. And so sci-fi really blew up in the 80s, and horror obviously was big in the 80s into the 90s. And you see those things kind of coming together. There's, I mean, this movie does feel very anime influenced in a lot of way, the pitch of it, and kind of like the pacing, the tone, some of the camera angles feel very much influenced by animation. And so you can kind of feel that kind of coming together in this like live action setting. The trench coats and stuff, it feels very John Woo, very The Crow, like I said. You know, with the Batman movie in 1989, that really changed the way that people approach superhero films. It made them much darker. Comic book adaptations were very different thereafter. So that's kind of like coming together into this. And then you also see, I think there's a big John Woo influence on this film, not directly in as much as they're trying to be like John Woo, but, you know, John Woo really did change the way that people conceived of action, I think, in the mid to late 80s, because the gunfighting became such a huge element. It wasn't just like, oh, pow, 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 whatever. It became like a central component of the conception of the film. And this movie has a lot of gunfighting in it, like a lot of machine guns. There's a scene in a hospital, hello, Hard Boiled, where like someone's like launching grenades out of this massive gun, and there's all these explosions, and like it feels very kind of John Woo, but it's very wire worky, right? So like 1990s Jet Li, like post Once Upon a Time in China type of movie, but it's got the anime influence, the sci-fi, like it's all of these things kind of coming together into this very like quintessentially mid-90s film. And it's just really, really, really entertaining. And I think if you're looking for just like a fun 90s action sci-fi movie with like some tinges of horror with some superhero comic book kind of feel, you can't go wrong with Black Mask. Let me show you the physical, and then I'll talk a little bit about the bonus features, and then I'll be out of your hair. I mean, come on, how like classic and iconic is this right here? I didn't remember a lot of this movie, but that scene I totally remembered once it kicked off. And then the booklet here actually has 2 essays in it. So like I said, again, pulling out all the bells and whistles. So this is just kind of the... There you go. So this is the first, I should say, this is the first essay, Origin Story, Truth, Justice, and the Hong Kong Way in Black Mask by James Oliver. So this is a really interesting piece that talks about like superheroes and sci-fi and that kind of stuff, comic booky kind of stuff in the history of Hong Kong cinema and pop culture and stuff like that. So if you don't know a lot about that, which I don't really know a ton about that, on this release in general, you will learn a lot about this. I live among you well disguised, developing characters through action in Black Mask. This is Simon Abrams. Now, there's some really interesting stuff in this essay about the comic book that this is based on and the character that this comes from and the differences between the comic and the movie. And the only thing about this essay that I felt slightly unsatisfied by is that the subtitle of it is developing character through action, and it doesn't really address that at all, which is kind of, I think that's a really fascinating subject. And the way that cinema as a visual medium, especially martial arts and action cinema, can use visual language to show us kind of the depths of character, who they are, where they come from. And like, he kind of touches upon that at the end of the essay, but that's not really what the essay is about. So I thought the title is just a little bit misleading, but it's still an interesting little piece. And so to get into the bonus material on here, on the Hong Kong original uncut version of the film, there is a commentary track from Frank Jang. And Frank actually says in the commentary, he's going to do something different. So he talks about superhero stuff and comic book movies and sci-fi and things of that nature in Hong Kong to kind of contextualize it. He also does what he usually does, where like this movie was released on this day and it had this box office and this is the original language title and this is this actor, this is that actor and stuff like that. But there is more analysis too of kind of like sci-fi comic book superhero elements, how those figure into Hong Kong's history kind of culturally and what precedent there is for them, what they might be influenced by and stuff like that. And it's a really cool commentary track. I'm just looking at my notes to see if there's anything I could pull out to give you like an example of. He talks about how sci-fi and superhero and comic book movies did not establish themselves in Hong Kong as the same way that they did in the West. And so there's not as much precedent for something like this, which makes it really interesting. Oh, he does talk about Daniel Lee is listed as the director of this film. Choi Hawk produced this film. And a lot of people talk about how when Choi Hawk produced a film, he was very hands-on, shall we say. And sometimes it is believed that he actually ghost directed a lot of the films that he produced. And Frank talks about Choi Hawk's style. He talks about Daniel Lee's style, and he talks about where you can see those styles in the film and kind of piece together like who did what and whose vision was in charge of the. And Yuen Woo-ping, you know, as multiple people say in the bonus material here, Yuen Woo-ping's really kind of took over, I think, on the fighting scenes, and you can really see his style in that. I meant to mention earlier, and then I kind of got distracted talking about gunfighting and John Woo and stuff like that. The first scene where the Jet Li character shows up as the Black Mask in like the present tense of the story after we've established the background and stuff like that is really good. It is a really good like fight and action sequence. So I actually watched it twice. I was like, man, this is awesome. That was probably my favorite scene in the movie. It's just really good. And I mean, the script here is tight. Like there's a lot of character complications and like reversals, and there's multiple characters who are after something, who want something. It's not just like this simplistic thing of like following a hero on a journey, and like they really put some thought into like the arrangement of the characters and what their desires are and how they conflict with one another. And so it's not like crappy amateur filmmaking, right? It's like very talented people involved making like this very fun, silly popcorn movie that also happens to be like pretty gruesome and violent. So Mike and Arna have a commentary track on the export version. Arna talks about some stylistic similarities to Tetsuo Iron Man, if you're familiar with that Japanese film. They talk about Karen Mok's hair, which is pretty funny and not something I really would have thought about. Both they and Frank talk about the locations in the film. Like this was shot here, that was shot there, which I always love hearing about that kind of stuff. Arna talks about like camera techniques. You know, Arna's a filmmaker, and he's actually interviewed Choi Hawk too for a documentary. So he's talked to Choi Hawk about his work as a producer and a director and stuff like that. So he's got, and as a filmmaker himself, he's got a lot of insight into like technique, editing, camera work and stuff like that. Mike Lear obviously knows like most of the people who are in this film, because in 1996 he was in Hong Kong working in the industry. So there's a lot of insight into how the industry was working at the time and who these people are and that kind of stuff. They talk about how violent the movie is, like I've said here, like really kind of unexpectedly. Lawrence Lau, who directed the Lee Rock movies, among various other things, has a cameo in this film as an actor. So they like lots of stuff like that they point out where like I wouldn't have known who that person is and who that person is. And the hospital, which is one of the locations in the film, like I said, there's like this kind of like a couple hospital sequences in here. They talk about which hospital that was, how a lot of movies were filmed there, what the fate of that hospital was, interesting stuff like that. So then you get something called Mega Shock, which is 30 minutes long. And this is an interview with, let me read you the fellow's name here, Leon Hunt. So wait, no, I'm reading the wrong thing. Mike Lambert is his name, excuse me. He's a martial artist, fight choreographer, and stunt performer. And he fights Jet Li in this movie. And it's a really freaking cool fight. It's like one of the fights in the climax of the film. And there's lots of like really fast, high kicking. And it's like a really exciting, dynamic, visually interesting fight scene. And there's like a 30-minute long interview with him on here that goes over his entire career, like where he comes from, how he started. He talks about his sister loving Bruce Lee, and he fell in love with Bruce Lee because of that, and how that led him to want to study martial arts and see more films of this nature and stuff like that. So that's a really cool interview, and I highly recommend checking that out. Andrew Heskins has an 8.5-minute long kind of like appreciation overview of the film. He talks about the director's career in Daniel Lee. He talks about Yuen Woo-ping's style. He compares this movie to Full Contact, which I like never would have thought of, which is kind of interesting. And then Leon Hunt has an 18-minute kind of talking head piece, and he talks about Jet Li originally being from China and how he ended up coming to Hong Kong and like the height of his career, the different stages of his career. and things of that nature. Hello, I had a little visitor come to my office. I'm at work right now, and I've been doing this thing where I come in early and I record videos before everyone else comes in, but there was someone wandering around the hallway, had a question to ask. So I went and I answered that, and I'm back with you now. We are talking about Jet Li. We were talking about Black Mask. I was talking about the Leon Hunt 18-minute long appreciation of this film. He talks about the different kind of stages in Jet Li's career, which I thought was really interesting. And he talks about his contemporary action films that are set in Hong Kong, the types of characters he typically plays, how he like represents mainland China in a lot of ways, like in the eyes of Hong Kong audiences and filmmakers and stuff like that, and how they use them in that regard, which is really interesting. And then the 19.5-minute long archival making of, which is really freaking amazing because there's like not Jet Li, Choi Hark just sitting in his office, like doing this interview about the movie, the origins of it, why he was interested in superhero films. Like it's a really, really cool little kind of piece of history there. And then there's like different trailers and stuff like that on here. But so this is Black Mask. I mean, it's a really, really fun, classic, incredibly famous, very 90s sci-fi action martial arts extravaganza. You will definitely enjoy this film. I mean, I would imagine that a lot of people who are buying this limited version of this movie that has 4 versions of the film on it are really like the big, like it's so easy to see why, right? Like if I was 13 when this movie came out, I was 16 when it came out, I think on VHS or DVD or whatever in the United States, right? Like I would have loved this movie then. It's like too violent for something I should have been watching, definitely at age 13, maybe not as much at age 16, but like it's gruesome, it's violent, it's dark, it's creepy, it's weird. It's got like unnecessary, scantily clad women dancing on tables in the rain. In the rain in it, right? Like it's a very like boys view movie of like people beating the crap out of each other and violence and ridiculousness. And like you could see like why people love this movie. It came out like at just the right time for like a generation of people who are fans of these films to just be blown away by it. And so I would imagine a lot of people who are picking this release up are people for whom this is like an absolute classic must-own film that's like a staple of their adolescence. And they really want to get it and have all these versions of it and this bonus material and stuff like that. Like people in my Facebook group have been talking about this release and how they've been waiting for like a definitive Blu-ray release with multiple versions of this film for a while. So, but if you are unfamiliar and if you are interested in checking out, if you're a Jet Li fan and maybe you haven't seen this, if you like sci-fi, superhero movies, comic book movies, that kind of stuff, it's Black Mask, it's Jet Li, it's Eureka Entertainment pulling out all the bells and whistles. And I should give a shout out to Gokaiju too, because I usually really love Gokaiju's artwork for slipcases, and this is no exception. Gokaiju did incredible artwork for, didn't he do the Rich and Famous and Tragic Hero double feature set, which I loved that artwork, and that was one of my favorite releases from last year. So my name is Will. You're watching Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. I thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.